Path of Exile 2 launches in under a week, and whether you're new to Path of Exile completely or you just want to see some of the big changes coming in the next game, here are 10 things you need to know before jumping into the early access on the 6th of December. First things first, the classes. Path of Exile 2 will have 12 classes on its full release, and we'll get 6 of them in the early access. They plan to release each of the other classes throughout the early access period, so we'll get to play them all and test them all before the game goes into its full release. So next week, the classes we'll have available are Warrior, Sorceress, Ranger, Witch, Monk, and Mercenary. Some of these are from the base game with some changes, and then some, like the Mercenary, will be completely new classes. And on top of this, every class can also ascend, which is basically like evolving if you've never played the first game. It's like having a subclass. This gives you a new skill tree and new powers. So let's talk about that next. Every class can take on a trial during the story and ascend into their new form, their new subclass. Each class can choose between 3 Ascensions, with 2 being available during the early access, so 2 for every class. And some of these are sounding incredible so far. Some that I'm really excited for is the Sorceress can ascend into a Chronomancer, basically a time mage, which you don't see that very often, and it's really unique. The Witch can ascend into the Infernalist, letting it turn into a full demon, like a demon form, or a Blood Mage that uses its life to deal damage. So there is a ton of variety here. There'll also be a system where redoing these trials additional times and on harder difficulties can give you more skill points for your Ascendancy skill tree and basically make your subclasses stronger. They've confirmed that although you can change your passive skill tree, you can, respec your passive tree and move things around, you cannot change your Ascendancy at all. So think of this as a final and permanent evolution. This may change on full release or in the future, but for now, this choice is very important. So on the full early access release with 6 classes and 2 Ascendancies each available, we basically have 12 different classes to play through, which is really, really fun. Okay, now I kind of want to explain this passive tree. So this is a huge part of Path of Exile and will be a massive part of Path of Exile 2. If you're a new player, this is easily the most confusing thing in the game. And I know when I first tried the game and I got my first passive point, I got instantly overwhelmed. It says you can spend a passive point. You open it and you get this like 1500 point tree open up and you have no idea what anything does or where to go. Well, we're getting the similar one in Path of Exile 2. So here's an explanation of how it works to hopefully make it seem more simple and, that you'll have more confidence going into it. So when you build your character, you get points from leveling up. So you get around 99 on your journey to 100. And then you get points for completing additional quests or tasks along the way. The passive tree itself is split into sections, so think of a dexterity section, a strength section, and then an intelligence section. And each class will start in a different part. So the warrior will start in the strength section, sorcerer, intelligence section, that kind of thing. And then the more hybrid classes will fit in between those. So in between strength and dex, and they'll have a bit of both. So don't stress about going everywhere. Kind of focus on your cone. And if you want to venture into a different section for a certain thing for your build, you can. If you're a sorcerer, for example, you'll start in the intelligence section of the passive tree, and all the nodes around you will be really good for a magic-based class. But then the option is available if you want to head into the dex area and pick something up for a different build. Okay, so what do all the different nodes mean? First, we have the nodes with the little plus on. These are always attribute points. So you can pick strength, int, dex, that kind of thing. Next, you have your minor stats, which are the same size as the attributes on here, but they have small buffs. So think increased fire damage, increased spell power, increased attack speed, that kind of stuff. So that's the simple things you'll be moving through. Then at the end of these small nodes, you have the bigger nodes, and these have a border around them and give much more of a buff than the small ones. They're usually at the end of a chain, so you'll go down the spell power chain, you'll get like 10% spell power, 10% spell power, and then at the end, there'll be a big node with like 20% spell power and a boost to intelligence. So it's much better to try and pick up lots of these or work towards them. The next big node on here is the keystone, and these are the most defined circles. They're big with big borders, and these are the build defining nodes. They have massive upsides, but usually downsides too. And you will work your build around these nodes. So in Path of Exile 2, for example, I'll use one as an example. We have the Giant's Blood Keystone node. And this is, they've shown this as, it lets you dual wield 2-handed weapons. So you can have 2 big 2-handed weapons, one in each hand. But these weapons will then need double the attribute requirement. So if you want to make this build, you'll have a purpose to head to the Giant's Blood Keystone, and you'll know on the way you should be getting as much strength as possible. And that's a simple one, and that's kind of how you want to work your build. If you're going to go completely alone in making your build and not use any sort of build guide, that's how I would focus it. Look for keystones, head there, and try and support the keystone with the things along the way. Okay, And then finally, we have the jewel slots. These are like a square-shaped empty slot, and there's nothing here. And they let us socket jewels, which you'll find in the game. These can give big buffs to things around them, and likely other big effects that we haven't seen yet from what's been released. This is all keeping it very, very simple, but hopefully this explains how this giant passive tree works. Okay, now let's talk game progression. How will the game look in early access, and how is that different from the full release? Well, they've announced that the game itself will feature 6 acts, and then once you finish those, you'll unlock the endgame. However, in early access, they've done something a little different. They've decided to finish the endgame and hold back some of the story to work on that in the future. So on early access, we'll have 3 acts, you'll complete those, and then you'll complete those again on cruel difficulty, and then you'll open up the full endgame. So that makes up for the unfinished parts of the story, but it will help us try the game on a hard difficulty, prepare for the endgame, and level up to be ready for it. On the one hand, this might turn some people off, but having a full endgame available in early access in an ARPG is a massive win, and lots of us are looking forward to this. Okay, once you get to endgame, you unlock this thing called the Atlas, and this is where you travel around this massive map, completing different zones, taking part in these huge events like breaches, expeditions, deliriums, and more, while you work towards making everything stronger, increasing your loot, and taking on the big bosses. I've done a full endgame video for Path of Exile 2. I'll link that down below if you want to go check out what all this stuff is. What's a delirium? Well, it's all in another video if you want to check it out in detail. But one thing you need to know is Path of Exile excels at its endgame content and progression. PoE 2 is looking to be just as strong, just as polished, and just as detailed. Every single endgame content has its own skill tree, progression, and unique player power reward to keep you coming back and progressing in that specific type of content. So there is a ton to be excited about here. Okay, now let's talk about gem slots. They've gone, kinda. If you played Path of Exile, you'll know the most challenging part of the game is how your abilities work. Your abilities come in gems, and you have to put the gems into your equipment. And the big chase items would be making sure that you have the right equipment with the right color gem slots all connected so you can fit all these really complicated abilities in. Well, that's gone. Now, all of your skills have a skill window. There is a big skill window with all of the skills, and your skill gems go into this skill window, and you just socket the skill gem into the skill window, and any passives to support that skill just go into this skill window as well. This is a massive change that will make the game so much more approachable for new players. And with the passive gems and the amount of gems available, we still have a ton of depth here for making cool and interesting builds. On top of this, passive gems are also changing. You can only have 1 passive gem of each type per character, and you can have 5 passives per ability as a maximum. So say you want to make a warrior. You can't just throw life leech and melee physical power onto every single one of your warrior abilities. You can have 1 ability and juice that up, give that loads of damage, and then give it life leech. And then another, maybe you would have to give that fire and elemental support gems, or you give it AoE and an immolate to burn things around you. I think this is a really good change that will be a lot more fun for new players while still giving veterans a lot of depth. But I know people really did like this, the gear system of the different slots and lining them all up. So I'm curious if you think this was a good or bad change. Okay, now let's talk about the combat changes. This game is evolving massively from the first one. So here are some cool new features to be aware of and to look forward to. Firstly, we now have a Souls-like dodge roll that can evade abilities. And if you evade, you take no damage. You can dodge attacks and you can dodge projectiles, I believe, and then you can't dodge big AoEs on the ground. However, there are certain things in the skill tree which changes the way the evade works, the dodge roll works, which is very interesting. They've also said, I think, that this will scale with movement speed. So you're going to see monks and rangers darting around really fast, and then big clunky melees maybe just slugging around. So yeah, this is very interesting. There's now also going to be an active blocking. So if you have a shield, you can actively block attacks to prevent damage. A huge change for melee classes. There'll also be new weapon types such as spears, crossbows, flares, maces. So there's a ton to look forward to. Okay, now a quick one is about gold and how gold will work in Path of Exile 2. This might sound really simple if you've never played a Path of Exile game before, but let me explain. If you played the first game, you'll know that whenever you sell items to the vendor, they trade in for random crafting materials. And this is great once you know what the game is and how it works. But as a new player, you find a bunch of gear while leveling, you sell it to a vendor, and they just give you weird little materials they make no sense. And you just have this inventory full of weird parts and sprockets and papers, and you've got no idea what any of it does. So now you just sell stuff and you get gold. the same gold that you get can be used to reset your passive skill tree. It can be used to buy stuff from vendors, roll things. So it's a really nice and simple change. It's nice to see gold get used in the recent PoE League, and having it in PoE 2, I think is going to be a really nice change that, again, you're going to hear this a lot, makes the game more approachable to new players. And that's, I think, something they've worked hard on for Path of Exile 2. Finally, something that's not maybe for everyone, but people are praising the controller support available in Path of Exile 2. So much so that people are saying it feels like it was fully made for controller and controller support, which is fantastic. I love kicking back and playing ARPGs with a controller at certain times, but Path of Exile never really felt great, and I never use my controller. So it's really encouraging to hear how good it will be on PoE 2. They've announced it will give great movement options, combat options, and even better control over like the gear, menu navigation, hovering over tooltips and abilities. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be trying to play on controller while leveling, to break up the big leveling grinds, and then maybe switch to keyboard and mouse for endgame if it feels like it's dropping off. But who knows, if it's as good as people are saying, maybe I'll give it a try on bosses and see what it's like. Even if you don't use a controller, we'll get in a WASD movement option for keyboard and mouse. So whatever you're playing on, there's more options to try, which is never a bad thing. But yeah, loads of big and small changes are coming to Path of Exile 2, and these are just some of the things that I thought were really important and I wanted to share if you're looking to jump into the game on early access. The only other thing is the cost, and it's $30 on their store for an early access key starting on the 6th of December, with other supporter cosmetic packages available if you want to support the game and give more. Completely up to you though. If you don't want to spend anything, you think that's too much, that's good too, because the game will be free when it fully releases. So if you're not sold on Path of Exile 2, you're really not sure, wait for the full release and play it completely for free. But yeah, hopefully that's everything that you need to know if you're thinking about jumping into the game. If this has helped, do consider dropping a like or subscribing to the channel for more. And if you have any other tips or information that you think new players should know, let people know in the comments. But that's it from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.